You have probably felt it. In a meeting where smiles hide silent power plays. In a friendship that feels like a chessboard instead of a safe space. At a job interview where every word seems rehearsed, calculated, like everyone is wearing a mask, there is a quiet, invisible game being played all around us, one we often sense but rarely name. And somewhere deep in the archive of Western history, one man dared to name it. He wrote what others only implied. He stripped the world of its pretty illusions and showed the machinery underneath. Niccolò Machiavelli, the man whose name still echoes through politics, boardrooms, and even dating advice forums. For centuries, he's been painted as a villain, cold, ruthless, manipulative. But what if he wasn't trying to corrupt the world? What if he was simply the first to say, out loud, how it really works? Machiavelli didn't create power games. He just noticed them. His writings, especially The Prince, have become symbolic of cunning strategy, emotional detachment, and ruthless realism. But that's just the surface. Underneath the controversy is something far more disturbing and far more relatable, because his ideas reveal not just how systems work, but how we work. And maybe that's why people fear him. Not because he was wrong, but because he was uncomfortably right. This video is not a defense of Machiavelli. It is not a takedown either. It is something more intimate, a psychological journey into the mechanics of power, how it moves through human relationships, how it seduces, corrupts, protects, and isolates. We will explore how his ideas mirror timeless human instincts, self-preservation, ambition, fear, and how they continue to shape modern politics, workplaces, and even our inner lives. Because Machiavelli isn't just a figure from Renaissance Italy. He's an archetype, a mirror for what happens when idealism crashes into reality. His story is not ancient, it is modern and personal. This story begins in the ruins of Florence, but it doesn't stay there. It threads through empires and revolutions, through psychology labs and leadership seminars, through your own life and mine. So, why does this matter now? Because in a world obsessed with branding, performance, and influence, the line between authenticity and manipulation has never been thinner. Understanding Machiavelli, really understanding him, is not about learning how to be ruthless. It's about recognizing when we already are, or when others are, and what we choose to do with that awareness. This is not about paranoia. This is about clarity. Let's begin. To understand Machiavelli is to understand the shadow behind the throne, the whisper behind the applause, the calculations behind the charisma. But before we judge him through a modern lens, we need to step into his world. It was the late 15th century. Florence, once a cultural jewel of the Italian Renaissance, was caught in a violent dance between republic and tyranny. The Medici family, wealthy bankers turned de facto monarchs, ruled the city like a theater, elegant on the surface, ruthless backstage. Then came Savonarola, a fanatical preacher who claimed to cleanse Florence of corruption, only to burn in the public square himself, consumed by the very fire he lit. Machiavelli grew up in this world, one of beauty laced with betrayal, art entangled with assassination. And when the Medici fell briefly from power, he entered public service. He believed in the Republic. He believed in civic virtue. And then the Medici came back. He was arrested, tortured, exiled. That's when he wrote The Prince. It was not a love letter to tyranny. It was a survival manual, a brutally honest portrait of power stripped of all idealism. He did not speak of how things should be. He spoke of how they are. He wrote that rulers must be feared if they cannot be loved, that morality is flexible in the face of political necessity, that appearances often matter more than truth, that cruelty, when used strategically and decisively, can be more merciful than indecisive kindness. To many, this sounded monstrous. To others, it was the most honest political document ever written. But what was he really doing? In many ways, Machiavelli was reviving an ancient tension, the war between virtù and fortuna. Virtù was not virtue in the Christian sense. It was not about being good, it was about being capable, resilient, astute, the ability to shape destiny, to master fate. Fortuna was the opposite. Luck, chaos, the unpredictable storms of life. Machiavelli argued that the great leaders were those who could bend fortune to their will through sheer willpower and strategy. And this wasn't new. The Greeks saw a similar battle in their myths. Odysseus, cunning and adaptable, survives where others fall because he understands the game. He lies, schemes, charms, and endures. In Hindu epics, Krishna advises Arjuna not to be paralyzed by morality, but to act wisely according to the role he must play. Even in early Islamic thought, there is recognition that wisdom sometimes requires discretion over directness, strategy over purity. So, while Machiavelli shocked the Christian West, much of the ancient world would have nodded quietly in agreement. The fear he stirred came not because he invented these ideas, but because he laid them bare. For centuries, politics in Europe had been draped in the robes of religion. Kings ruled by divine right. Power was justified by God, not by pragmatism. Machiavelli stripped that pretense away. He said the quiet part out loud. He made the implicit explicit, and he was punished for it. Not with execution, but with distortion. Over time, his name became an adjective. Machiavellian, manipulative, cold, deceptive. He became a villain in the story of Western ethics. But perhaps that says more about us than him. Because the truth is, many of us are taught idealism, but live realism. We tell children to always be honest, but reward those who say what we want to hear. We say integrity matters, but promote those who play politics better. We claim to hate manipulation, but we watch reality shows built entirely on it. The contradiction is not Machiavelli's. It is ours. And this contradiction is not limited to kings and politicians. It seeps into how we navigate office politics. Family dynamics, social hierarchies, even our self-talk. We wear masks to survive. We posture to be accepted. We bend the truth, not always out of malice, but out of fear, of losing a job, a partner, a sense of control. Machiavelli simply held up a mirror, and the image it reflected was uncomfortable. But let's be clear, he did not believe cruelty should be random. In fact, he argued the opposite, that cruelty, when necessary, must be swift and final, that confusion and inconsistency breed resentment more than tough decisions ever will. He believed that stability often required difficult choices, that kindness without strength is not virtue, it is weakness dressed in good intentions. This is a difficult pill to swallow in a culture that celebrates softness, but often punishes vulnerability. We are told to be kind, but also to stand up for ourselves, to be open, but also strategic, to forgive, but never be a fool. Machiavelli's insights live in this tension. They are not a guide for tyranny. They are a guide for navigating a world where idealism alone is not enough. And if we zoom out, we see his fingerprints everywhere. In corporate strategy, in political campaigns, in self-help books that preach personal branding, social leverage, or alpha energy. The same truths, just wrapped in different language. What Machiavelli taught us, whether we admit it or not, is that power is not evil. It is a force. Like fire, it can warm, it can destroy. What matters is how we use it, and whether we are aware of it when it is being used on us, because ignorance of power does not make you innocent. It makes you vulnerable. And so, centuries after he wrote in exile, Machiavelli is still misunderstood, still misquoted, still feared, but also perhaps more relevant than ever. We are not just living in a Machiavellian world. We are creating one. The question is, will we do it blindly, or with our eyes wide open? If Machiavelli mapped the political terrain of power, then modern psychology explored the terrain within. Because the game of power is not just about empires and elections. It is about attention, belonging, safety, the stories we tell ourselves, the identities we build, the masks we wear without realizing. To understand Machiavelli in the modern world, we need to go inward, into the subconscious, into the places where ambition is born and where fear hides behind charm. At the core of Machiavellian thought is a recognition that humans are not purely rational beings. We are emotional, reactive, often driven by unconscious needs we do not even fully understand. Modern psychology has echoed this. One of the most striking parallels comes from the Dark Triad, a psychological framework that includes 3 traits: Machiavellianism, narcissism, and psychopathy. While not clinical diagnoses on their own, these traits describe patterns of behavior rooted in manipulation, self-interest, and a lack of empathy. People high in Machiavellian traits tend to be strategic, calculating, and focused on long-term personal gain. They read the room, adapt their persona. Say what you want to hear, not because it is true, but because it works. But here is the uncomfortable truth. This is not limited to villains. Many of us have learned to use some of these behaviors to survive. Ever told someone what they wanted to hear just to keep the peace? Ever withheld the truth to avoid judgment? Ever smiled while feeling something entirely different inside? These are micro-Machiavellian moments, not because they are evil, but because they are strategic. And often they are born from trauma, not cruelty. Psychologist Gabor Mate reminds us that behavior is often the language of unmet needs. What we call manipulation can sometimes be the survival skill of someone who grew up in emotional chaos. When authenticity is punished, people adapt. They become who they need to be in order to be accepted. That's not villainy. That's adaptation. Carl Jung took this deeper. He warned that what we repress does not disappear. It moves into the shadow, the part of the psyche where we bury traits we consider unacceptable. Anger, ambition, selfishness, seductiveness. But the shadow does not stay silent. It leaks out in passive aggression, in secret fantasies, in relationships that repeat the same power dynamics over and over again. Jung believed that to be whole, we must integrate the shadow. Not act it out recklessly, but face it, acknowledge it, understand its message, because the alternative is far more dangerous, being controlled by it without even knowing. And here is where Machiavelli becomes strangely relevant again. He did not say, be cruel. He said, understand cruelty. Don't pretend it does not exist. Don't pretend others are not capable of it. Do not live in denial and call it goodness. That is not virtue. That is vulnerability disguised as moral superiority. This aligns with the concept of emotional intelligence, a term popularized by psychologist Daniel Goleman. It is not about being nice. It is about being aware of your own emotions and of how others use theirs. People with high emotional intelligence are not always the loudest or the most charming. They are the ones who can feel what is really going on beneath the words, who can name the undercurrent in a room, who can set boundaries without burning bridges, who can read intentions without jumping to judgment. Emotional intelligence is the modern answer to Machiavellian strategy, not through manipulation, but through clarity, integrity with discernment. And this brings us to boundaries, a concept that ancient political theory ignored, but modern psychology centers. In a world where everyone is performing some version of themselves, boundaries are the line between manipulation and mutual respect. They are not walls. They are filters. They say, this is what I will allow. This is what I will not. And you may not always like it, but at least you will know who I am. The irony is that many people who reject Machiavellianism still suffer from its effects because they lack boundaries and are slowly drained by those who exploit them. But boundaries are not built in theory. They are forged in emotional self-awareness. And here another psychological insight emerges. Attachment theory. Developed by John Bowlby and expanded by Mary Ainsworth, attachment theory explores how early relationships shape our adult behavior. People with anxious attachment often fear abandonment and seek validation. People with avoidant attachment fear vulnerability and seek control. Both are vulnerable to manipulation, either by overgiving or by overguarding. A Machiavellian personality often learns, consciously or not, how to exploit these patterns. They give attention to the anxious until they are hooked. They give space to the avoidant until they are disarmed. And then they withdraw. They test. They provoke. Not always to hurt, but to feel powerful in a world that once made them feel powerless. So, what is the antidote? Self-knowledge, emotional literacy. Awareness of our own needs and patterns, because when we understand our vulnerabilities, they can no longer be weaponized. This is not new wisdom. It echoes in ancient teachings. In the Tao Te Ching, Laozi writes that mastering others is strength, but mastering yourself is true power. The Stoics taught that control over one's mind is the only true form of control. The Sufis speak of nafs, the egoic self that must be purified through awareness, not punishment. Even in indigenous traditions, power is not about domination. It is about harmony, the ability to walk through life without losing your center. Machiavelli did not speak of this. He was not a therapist. He was a political realist. But when we read him today, we can see the same dynamics he described playing out not just in palaces, but in boardrooms, marriages, social media, even our inner dialogue. The question is not whether power exists. It is whether we are conscious of how it moves through us. Because when we deny our own hunger for influence, for validation, for control, we do not transcend it. We become controlled by it. Passively, unconsciously, often with a smile. To live with integrity in a Machiavellian world does not mean rejecting power. It means reclaiming it, consciously, compassionately, and with full awareness of its double edge. And that begins inside. To truly grasp how power operates in the world, we must turn our gaze inward. The ancient maxim, "Know thyself," remains one of the most profound keys to understanding power. Because the way power functions in societies and governments mirrors the way it moves inside each of us. In fact, the most decisive battleground for power is the self. Consider this. Every choice you make is an exercise in power. Power over your thoughts, your emotions, your impulses, and ultimately your destiny. Yet many of us unconsciously surrender this power daily. We give it away to fear, to past wounds, to social conditioning, or to the expectations of others. We become prisoners to internal rulers, voices of doubt, shame, or entitlement that govern us without our awareness. Machiavelli's insights, though applied outwardly to princes and republics, apply just as fiercely inwardly. He understood that those who wield power effectively must first master their own passions and fears. He saw that unchecked emotions could undo even the strongest leaders. Modern psychology echoes this ancient wisdom. Carl Jung described the psyche as a complex kingdom, populated not just by the conscious mind but also by a vast shadow realm of unconscious drives, memories, and archetypes. These hidden forces can shape behavior as much as any external circumstance. Without self-mastery, they can turn a person into a puppet of impulses and anxieties. This internal battle often plays out between different parts of ourselves, the rational versus the emotional, the idealistic versus the cynical, the courageous versus the fearful. Each faction demands attention and allegiance, yet none alone holds the full truth of who we are. The first step toward mastery is recognition. We must become willing to face the shadow aspects within us, not to judge or suppress them, but to understand and integrate them. Jung famously said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." Ask yourself, What parts of yourself have you hidden away? Which fears or desires do you deny? What drives your choices when you are unaware? This inner inquiry is not comfortable, but it is transformative. Take the example of anger. Outwardly, it may seem destructive or taboo. Yet, beneath anger often lies a vital signal, a boundary crossed, a need unmet, an injustice perceived. By becoming conscious of this anger and its roots, you reclaim a source of power rather than letting it unconsciously sabotage your relationships or decisions. Similarly, consider ambition. Often demonized as greed or selfishness, ambition in its healthiest form is a natural drive toward growth and contribution. When tempered by wisdom and empathy, ambition becomes a force for positive change rather than reckless domination. Power also lives in our stories, the narratives we tell ourselves about who we are and what we deserve. These stories can be limiting or liberating. They shape how we perceive our ability to influence the world and ourselves. A common story might be, "I am not enough, so I must constantly prove my worth through achievement or approval." This story leads to compulsive striving, burnout, and vulnerability to manipulation. But a revised story might be, "I am inherently valuable, and my worth does not depend on others' approval." From this place, power becomes self-possession rather than frantic control. Changing these stories requires courage, the courage to question long-held beliefs and to sit with uncertainty. It is a process of deconstruction and reconstruction, like clearing old maps to draw new ones. It demands patience and compassion, because these narratives are often deeply entwined with identity and survival. Another pillar of self-mastery is emotional regulation, which we touched on earlier but merits deeper exploration. Emotions are powerful signals, but when they overwhelm, they hijack reason and clarity. Learning to observe emotions without immediate reaction, what mindfulness traditions call the witness consciousness, is a radical act of reclaiming power. When you pause before responding to anger, fear, or jealousy, you create a space where choice emerges. Instead of being driven by unconscious scripts, you can decide how to act aligned with your values and goals. This kind of emotional intelligence transforms not just personal well-being, but also relationships and leadership. Leaders who can hold their own emotions steady inspire trust and foster collaboration. They are less likely to be swayed by manipulation or to resort to coercion. The inner battlefield also involves confronting vulnerability, a word often misunderstood as weakness. Brené Brown, a modern scholar on courage, teaches us that vulnerability is the birthplace of creativity, connection, and authentic power. To be vulnerable is to be fully seen, including our fears and imperfections, and to act despite them. Machiavelli's world was brutal, yet even he hinted at the necessity of balance between hardness and softness. True power is not only the strength to push forward, but also the humility to admit limits and seek help. This brings us to the concept of self-trust, the foundation upon which all conscious power stands. Self-trust means believing in your ability to navigate life's complexities, to recover from mistakes, and to learn continuously. Without it, power becomes fragile, dependent on external validation or control. Building self-trust is a gradual process. It starts with small acts of integrity, keeping promises to yourself, honoring your needs, and standing up for your truth. Over time, these acts accumulate, forming an inner compass that guides you even when external circumstances are turbulent. The journey of self-mastery is never linear. There will be setbacks, moments of doubt, and times when old patterns reassert themselves. But each challenge is an invitation to deepen your awareness and resilience. In this ongoing process, the ancient wisdom of archetypes can offer guidance. The warrior teaches discipline and courage. The lover embodies empathy and connection. The magician represents insight and transformation. and the king or queen stands for balanced authority and service. By recognizing which archetypes dominate your inner world and which need more presence, you can cultivate a richer, more integrated self. Ultimately, the most profound expression of power is the power to choose. To choose not just how you act, but how you see yourself and the world. To refuse victimhood and to step into your role as a conscious creator of your life. When you master this inner domain, you change the way power operates outwardly. You become less reactive to manipulation, more skilled at influence, and more aligned with a purpose that transcends personal gain. This is not an easy path, but it is a worthy one. Because power is not just about control, it is about freedom. The freedom to be who you truly are and to shape a world that reflects that truth. Pause for a moment. Reflect on your own inner battlefield. Where do you feel called to bring more awareness? What parts of your psyche need your courage and compassion? This is your invitation to step deeper into your own power, not as a conquest, but as a homecoming. So, what happens when we misunderstand power? When we demonize it, repress it, or, just as dangerously, idolize it without question? The consequences unfold not just in headlines or history books, but in quiet moments of personal compromise. In the relationships where we feel invisible. In the careers where we silently comply. In the friendships where truth becomes too costly to speak. When we exile Machiavellian insight from our self-understanding, we do not become morally superior. We become emotionally disarmed. At the personal level, the fear of power, our own or others, often leads to emotional self-betrayal. We shrink ourselves to avoid conflict. We stay quiet to avoid rejection. We confuse kindness with compliance, and the result is a slow erosion of self-respect. We begin to feel powerless, not because someone took our power, but because we handed it over, piece by piece, in the name of peace. This is not theoretical. It is lived reality for many. Consider the person in a toxic workplace. They see manipulation, favoritism, hidden agendas. But they have been told their whole life that good people do not play politics. So they stay quiet. They hope merit will speak louder than maneuvering. It does not. The promotion goes elsewhere. Their dignity shrinks in silence. Or consider the partner who consistently accommodates, apologizes, bends. They think they are being loving. What they are being is slowly erased. Until one day they look in the mirror and cannot find themselves. These are the invisible casualties of misunderstood power. And it goes further. At a societal level, the refusal to acknowledge how influence works creates a vacuum that gets filled by those who are not afraid to use it, often without conscience. History shows us this pattern again and again. Look at how empires rose, not just through armies, but through propaganda, through myth-making, through manipulation of identity and fear. Hitler did not just use weapons. He used words, symbols, the deep psychology of mass belonging and exclusion. Stalin used paranoia as policy. Colonial powers used civility as a cover for cruelty. None of this would have surprised Machiavelli, but the real danger today is more subtle. Because in the age of digital life, manipulation has gone microscopic. It's in algorithms that reward outrage, in influencers who sell empowerment while feeding insecurity, in self-help gurus who teach dominance disguised as confidence, in workplaces that praise team spirit while quietly rewarding obedience. It's in the way we measure success, not by depth of character but by visibility, not by integrity but by influence. And when we internalize this, the result is often fragmented identity. We split ourselves. There's the curated self, the version of us that plays well in public. And then there's the buried self. The parts we were told were too much, too ambitious, too angry, too sensitive, too honest. The psychological toll is heavy. Many people live in a kind of quiet confusion. They feel anxious but cannot explain why. They feel numb, but still perform. They are not broken, but they are disconnected from themselves, from their values, from their voice. Carl Jung warned that what remains unconscious comes to us as fate, that when we do not face the dynamics of power within us, they show up in our lives as cycles we cannot break. Toxic bosses, repeated betrayals, chronic people-pleasing, self-sabotage. These are not just bad luck, they are symptoms of an unlived self, and unlived selves breed resentment. This is where the shadow flips. The person who once feared power may one day resent those who wield it. And that resentment, if left unexamined, becomes a new form of manipulation, passive, cynical, controlling from the sidelines. The rebel becomes the tyrant in disguise, not with swords, but with guilt, with silence, with withdrawal. This is why awareness is everything. Because the problem is not power itself, it is unconscious power, power that moves through us without reflection, power that is driven by fear rather than clarity. And that fear can come from many places. From childhoods where love was conditional, so we learned to perform. From schools that rewarded obedience over originality. From cultures that told us who we must be, instead of helping us discover who we are. The Machiavellian world begins there, not in palaces, but in playgrounds. In the moment, a child learns that telling the truth brings punishment, but pretending brings praise. That is the beginning of strategy. Not out of evil, but out of necessity. And so, we grow up. We put on the masks. We forget they are masks. We call it maturity, professionalism, branding. But deep down, something aches. That ache is not weakness. It is the soul's memory of who we were before we started playing the game. So, where do we go from here? First, we must grieve. Truly. Grieve the ways we have been manipulated. Grieve the times we manipulated others, even unknowingly. Grieve the masks that once protected us but now suffocate us. Then we must choose, consciously, not to reject power, but to engage with it ethically, emotionally, spiritually. Power without empathy is tyranny. Empathy without power is martyrdom. But power with empathy, that is leadership, inner and outer. History offers rare but luminous examples. Marcus Aurelius, an emperor who journaled about virtue more than he ruled by it. Harriet Tubman, who understood strategy, timing, courage, and sacrifice. Nelson Mandela, who learned to navigate a brutal system, not with bitterness, but with vision. These were not naive people. They were Machiavellian in the best sense, aware, strategic, unflinching, but also grounded, humane, self-aware. And that is the integration we need now, because the game will not stop. Influence will always shape lives. The question is, who do we become while playing it? Not everyone needs to be a ruler, but everyone needs to rule their own life, with vision, with clarity, with courage. So, how do we navigate this world where power is inevitable, where influence is constantly flowing through relationships, workplaces, even within ourselves, without losing our soul in the process? How do we reclaim our power consciously and compassionately, rather than unconsciously or destructively? The answer lies in integration of mind, heart, and spirit. It is the delicate balance of knowing when to assert, when to yield, when to stand firm, and when to listen deeply. This balance is not a fixed state, but a lifelong practice. The first step is to cultivate self-awareness. Without knowing our internal landscape, our triggers, fears, desires, we are at the mercy of external forces. Machiavelli recognized this in political actors. Modern psychology reveals it for each of us as individuals. One of the most effective tools here is journaling. By putting pen to paper, we create a dialogue with ourselves. We expose hidden thoughts, unearth unconscious motivations, and trace patterns that repeat in relationships or decisions. Try this. At the end of each day, Write without judgment about moments when you felt either powerless or overly controlling. What emotions were behind those moments? What needs were unmet? This practice not only clarifies your inner world, but also starts dismantling the unconscious scripts that drive unhelpful behaviors. Next, embrace emotional regulation. Machiavelli's cold pragmatism may seem devoid of feeling, but in reality, he understood the power of managing emotions, both your own and others. Emotional intelligence means recognizing your feelings without being controlled by them. Techniques like mindful breathing, meditation, or even short pauses before reacting give you the space to respond rather than react. The Stoics called this apatheia, not indifference, but freedom from destructive passions. When Marcus Aurelius advised himself to be like the rock that the waves keep crashing over, he was urging himself to embody this calm center amid chaos. We can do the same, learning to stay grounded even when the tides of manipulation or conflict rise. Another key practice is developing healthy boundaries. Boundaries are the invisible lines that protect your emotional and psychological well-being. Setting them can feel uncomfortable, especially if you have been conditioned to please or avoid conflict, but they are essential for sustainable relationships and self-respect. Start small. Notice when you feel drained after certain interactions. Ask yourself, what limits would have protected my energy? Then practice stating those limits gently but firmly. For example, I need some time to think before I respond, or I'm not comfortable discussing that right now. Remember, boundaries are not about shutting people out. They are about honoring your truth. To navigate power ethically, we also need discernment, the ability to see beneath surface appearances and understand intentions. This does not mean becoming cynical or paranoid, but rather cultivating a clear-eyed awareness. Ask, what is motivating this person? How does their behavior align with their words? Does this interaction honor my values? Here, empathy plays a paradoxical role. Machiavelli's world was ruthless, but empathy today is our secret weapon, not to be exploited, but to navigate complexity with grace. When we understand others' fears and needs, we gain leverage to build genuine influence without coercion. Building this kind of influence means shifting from domination to leadership with integrity. Leadership is not about control. It is about vision, about inspiring others by embodying the values you want to see in the world. This requires humility as much as courage, vulnerability as much as strength. One practice is to regularly reflect on your core values. What matters most to you? Justice, compassion, freedom. When faced with choices, use these values as your compass. This anchors power in purpose, preventing it from becoming mere ego trip or blind ambition. Another tool is cognitive behavioral techniques, CBT, that help reframe destructive thought patterns. If you catch yourself thinking, I must please everyone to be loved, or, if I set boundaries, I'll be rejected, pause and challenge these beliefs. Are they true? What evidence supports them? What new, empowering belief could replace them? This rewiring of thought is subtle but revolutionary. It frees us from the scripts written by fear. For those who feel overwhelmed by the shadow of power dynamics, therapy or coaching can offer safe space to explore wounds, rewrite narratives, and build resilience. There is no weakness in asking for guidance. It is a sign of wisdom and commitment to growth. Alongside these modern tools, ancient wisdom remains invaluable. The Sufi practice of muraqabah, watchful self-awareness, teaches us to observe our inner states without attachment or judgment. It is a way of sitting with discomfort, uncertainty, and ambition, learning their rhythms rather than being tossed by them. Stoicism encourages us to differentiate what we can control, our thoughts, our actions, from what we cannot, other people's opinions, external events. This distinction is a profound source of freedom. Mindfulness, rooted in Buddhist traditions, cultivates presence, the ability to engage fully with each moment without distraction or reactivity. This presence becomes a foundation from which power can be wielded with clarity and compassion. The journey is not about perfection. It is about gradual growth. Power without self-trust leads to rigidity or chaos, but power cultivated with patience, curiosity, and kindness toward oneself becomes a source of creative strength. Remember, even Machiavelli lived in uncertainty. He did not claim to have all answers. He simply described what he saw with brutal honesty. Today, we have the advantage of centuries of reflection, psychology, and spiritual traditions to guide us toward a more conscious path. In your own life, this might look like noticing when you feel compelled to please or manipulate, and choosing instead to pause and reflect. Practicing saying no to requests that drain you, even when it feels uncomfortable. Journaling regularly about your relationship with power, influence, and control. Setting daily intentions to act from your values, not from fear or habit. Seeking support when patterns feel too big to manage alone. As you build these habits, you may find your relationships deepen, not because you try to control them, but because you show up more authentically. You may find your work becomes more meaningful, not because you climb a ladder, but because you walk your own path. The world Machiavelli described is still here, but now you have the tools to engage with it, not as a victim, not as a victimizer, but as a conscious participant. Power can be a force for liberation or oppression. The choice is yours. The practice is lifelong, but the reward is real. A life lived with integrity, vision, and heart. If you have been with me on this journey through power, history, and the depths of the human psyche, thank you. This conversation is not just about understanding the world. It is about reclaiming your place within it. About stepping into your own power with clarity, courage, and kindness. You and I both know this is not easy. It requires us to look inward with honesty and bravery, to challenge long-held beliefs, and to embrace complexity without losing hope. But this is exactly why it matters so deeply. Here, in this space, we are committed to exploring the intersections of deep psychology, historical insight, and practical growth, not superficial quick fixes or empty motivation. Together, we learn to see power for what it truly is, a force that shapes us, for better or worse, and a tool we can wield with integrity. If you feel called to continue this journey, to build emotional intelligence, to set healthy boundaries, to lead your life with purpose, then I invite you to subscribe, because this is a space for growth, reflection, and transformation. A community where you can engage with ideas that challenge and inspire you to be more self-aware and empowered. We will walk this path together, exploring timeless wisdom alongside modern psychology, sharing stories that resonate with your experience, and offering tools that help you live more fully and authentically. So ask yourself, what does it mean to truly master your own power? How would your life change if you could navigate influence with both strength and empathy? What new possibilities would open if you led from a place of integrity and self-trust? These questions are invitations to deeper understanding, to meaningful change, and to reclaiming the life you are meant to live. If you are ready, subscribe now. Let us keep growing, reflecting, and evolving together. Because your journey toward conscious power is one of the most important paths you can take. If you have been with me on this journey through power, history, and the depths of the human psyche, thank you. This conversation is not just about understanding the world. It is about reclaiming your place within it. About stepping into your own power with clarity, courage, and kindness. You and I both know this is not easy. It requires us to look inward with honesty and bravery, to challenge long-held beliefs, and to embrace complexity without losing hope. But this is exactly why it matters so deeply. Here, in this space, we are committed to exploring the intersections of deep psychology, historical insight, and practical growth, not superficial quick fixes or empty motivation. Together, we learn to see power for what it truly is, a force that shapes us, for better or worse, and a tool we can wield with integrity. If you feel called to continue this journey, to build emotional intelligence, to set healthy boundaries, to lead your life with purpose, then I invite you to subscribe, because this is a space for growth, reflection, and transformation. A community where you can engage with ideas that challenge and inspire you to be more self-aware and empowered. We will walk this path together, exploring timeless wisdom alongside modern psychology, sharing stories that resonate with your experience, and offering tools that help you live more fully and authentically. So ask yourself, what does it mean to truly master your own power? How would your life change if you could navigate influence with both strength and empathy? What new possibilities would open if you led from a place of integrity and self-trust? These questions are invitations to deeper understanding, to meaningful change, and to reclaiming the life you are meant to live. If you are ready, subscribe now. Let us keep growing, reflecting, and evolving together. Because your journey toward conscious power is one of the most important paths you can take.